Namaskar, friends. Today we will talk about the elusive dopamine trap or the pleasure pathway of prayer and try to understand how delaying gratification leads to high intensity of peace, satisfaction, enjoyment, fulfillment that is experienced by all the siddhas and the yogis in the long run. So, as people living in the world, in Grihastha ashram, as married individuals, or as scholarly brahmacharyas, students trying to obtain their eventual career path goals, it's important to understand the trap of dopamine. So, this is all the understanding that has been generated through the understanding of scriptures, but also through understanding of the neuronal networks, the neurophysiology of addiction. So, this is a very robust discussion based on my own spiritual understanding as well as talking to different specialists in the field of addiction medicine. So, let's dive into it. The 6 stages of evolution of priya or dopamine, and hence also of salvation or getting out of the dopamine trap, starts with the first step, which I call the first exposure. The first exposure represents the innocent exposure of the Vishaya or the object of sensual gratification, which you are not, with the Indriya, which is the perceiver or antenna or the sense to perceive the object of sensual gratification. So, the combination of Vishaya with the Indriya. When there is that transient coming together of the Vishya with the Indriya, food with the tongue, music with the ear, touch with the skin, that creates a euphoric sense of feel good. In a state where you are totally quiet, you get a spike. And that is the spike of dopamine, of the pleasure pathway. And once that is created by the mind, which is the leader of the senses, there is that feeling of great goodness within yourself. You feel so good, you feel so amazing in the moment because you haven't felt like that ever. And you feel, you can say it's a high, it's a fun filled state, a state of immense pleasure that you have not experienced before. That is the main thing because it's the first exposure. So that's why it will create the illusion of Paramanand or Charamanand, heightened state of pleasure. And that is what gets us hooked on to that object of sensual gratification or the experience. But remember that this is a novice pleasure. It has to be the first exposure creating this effect. And here still, the individual who experiences the pleasure has the tendency to understand that he can stop the pleasure. It's very much a stoppable process till this point. So here you have an appreciation of your awareness, your consciousness, your ability to distinguish what is right versus wrong. It's still intact. Although you are a little bit influenced, infatuated by that experience. So the temptation leads to the first exposure, and the first exposure experience leads to pleasure or the release of sudden surge of dopamine. Now I said the spike or surge of dopamine because in life, 85 to 90% of the times, you cannot remain excited. You have to have this baseline state. Without the reference, there cannot be a spike. So that baseline persistent state that you are in all the time, because you cannot remain excited 90% of the times, is the 90% times of rest. And from the rest comes the action potential. So there has to be a resting stage. This resting stage defines your reference frame. And that is pretty low for most people because you are trying to be what you are not. Purusha is trying to be Prakriti. So it gets infatuated, disillusioned first, and then it gets a little bit chronically depressed, if you will. So that's why most of us are kind of unhappy in the status quo state that we are in. So that spike gives you a false sense of promise things can be changed forever. You can be extremely excited. However, the spike has to be followed by a fall. The crest has to be followed with a trough. So when that happens, then you get this sense of feeling down in the dumps, depressed, and you lose all hope. That's why after a high, a lot of individuals will feel the extreme low and they want to escape the low. They don't want to face the low because that is a very miserable experience. So the spike will be followed by a trough, and that is where you feel the weak, and then you will go again, reach out again for that Vishaya to give you another high. So the first high, the novice pleasure, will give rise to repeated exposures. These repeated exposures to the Vishaya is what creates attachment. These repeated exposures create a secondary spike, which is lower in amplitude of the dopamine from the first spike, because you cannot get the same hit the second time. So what do you do when you cannot get the same hit the second time? You increase the amount of the exposure to get a little bit more effect. But every time you increase the amount of the exposure, you are creating the system, you are creating an imbalance in the system, you are creating a structural damage to the system, and the integrity of the system is becoming weak. So ability of the body to take cocaine or alcohol, there is a certain threshold after which it is deadly, overdosing, and people can die. Similarly for everything in life, smoking, drinking, gambling, trading, sexual activity, everything, there is only so much the body can endure before you break it down. The physical integrity will dissolve. So you keep pushing the limits, and every time you are pushing the limits and repeatedly engaging in that exposure, the second exposure, third exposure, we call it the subsequent exposures, because you are gunadheen. You are under the influence of the material modes of nature, the rajas energy mostly, but the rajas is slowly converting into tamas. So see how it happened. You started from a state of balance, sattva. You wanted to have this exposure. You gained the first exposure, a rajasic experience, immense full pleasure, high spike of dopamine. But then you had to come back to the resting stage. 95% of the times you are in a resting stage. Then you get disillusioned again, you want another hit. So you go for the subsequent exposure. Same, you know that this pathway, I know, it has created a promise to bring me out of my misery state of baseline. So you go for a second hit. Even if it's a lesser hit, you accept it. But in the process, you lose your free choice. Your sankalp slowly is diminishing. You are becoming gunadheen. You are not able to withstand the temptation the second time. So even in the initial stages, it will become irreversible. Whereas in the first time, you could have stopped it even till the end. So in that stage, the enjoyment has become an obligation. It's not a novice pleasure anymore. It's a pleasure pathway that you well understand and you engage in. It creates a lesser spike than the first time, but still you are saying it's better than no spike. So I will continue to damage the structure of my system every single time for this smaller and smaller exposure. Now this is the inflection point, the third stage, the gunadheen exposure. Some people will remain gunadheen or under the influence of the material modes of this rajasic exposure, Indriya Vishya complex, to continue to go down that hill, continue in the pathway which will become addiction. And that is trying to procure your Vishya at any and every cost, even letting yourself down, your family down, everybody in the system is less important than the Vishya. The only object of living at that point is to enjoy from whatever little pleasure you can get. If you can increase it, well and good. If not, you keep in your path because it's a well-known path. You feel very comfortable in enjoying that. So that is the path of addiction. So gunadheen becomes addicted. That is the tamasic state of misery in which there is no awareness of the misery. The rajasic person still has awareness. He has still sankalp. He still has this consciousness. So he knows that what he's doing is wrong, but he still has to do it because what else to do? I hate the resting baseline. I want a spike. I want an experience. That's why I came in this world. And to get that, you have to create this Vishaya. And the whole first exposure started from the imbalance of the ahamkar with vivek, the ego with consciousness. And that's why you wanted to gain an experience. That was the reason to break the sattva and go into rajasic novice experience. Okay, so I told you the third stage, which is the gunadhina repeat exposure, is the stage of inflection. So what determines the inflection? What individuals will not pursue the path of addiction anymore and just break away from it, versus what person will continue the path? That depends upon your gunas, repeated exposure, continuation. That depends upon your samskaras, the subconscious proclivities that you have ingrained through this life and past lives. And your karma bandhan, how much of rest of the stuff, if you live in the status quo, needs to be burnt in terms of suffering, misery, experiences that you need to endure before things will change for you. So those three factors, the ongoing influences that you associate yourself with, the subconscious proclivities, and your karma bandhan, your logbook of activities done in this and past life. So those three things will determine whether you remain gunadhin to destroy yourself in addictions, or you switch the flip. You flip the switch and you say that I'm not going to allow this patterned, predictable behavior to continue. And that is where the switch flips, and the individual who was a bhogi, slowly becoming a rogi, has taken the pathway of becoming a sadhak, a yogi. In terms of food, I would say that is the time when you have cut back to two meals a day. If you start eating 1 meal a day, you become a yogi. If you start eating 3 meals a day, you'll become a bhogi. So when you are 2 meals, that is the balanced state for me, where you can flip either ways. You can go to 3 and become rogi, addicted, or you can become a yogi by cutting back to 1 meal a day. That's just an example in terms of food. You can think of it in the same way as sex, in terms of trading, gambling. You can think of it as consumption of smoking, alcohol, drugs. You can apply it to any Vishaya exposure you think of. So let's talk about the fourth stage, sadhak. The person who at the inflection point says, oh, wait a minute. From a novice pleasure of rajas, this is becoming a tamasic tendency of patterned, predictable exposure with lesser spike, but still going for the spike at the risk of breaking the structure, the physical integrity of this body, the Panch Mahabhut Sharir. You are destroying it by repeated exposures. What kind of person am I? So when he starts to question himself, then he will slowly change his influencing associations or the guna. The first change that will happen is in the environment. Solitude is a great place to start. You can remove the extrinsic environments, the toxic friends, the toxic culture, the toxic social media that you surround yourself with, and that leads you to follow that path in a detriment of you and your friends. So together we can destroy ourselves. That tendency will be removed. So the first thing you have to remove is change the environment. So for most people, if you want to think about in terms of food, you want to remove the junk food from your house. You don't have exposure to all the foods, cookies, brownies, cakes, processed foods, refrigerated foods, fried foods, high carb, refined foods. Just remove it. Hai hi nahi. I don't have it. How will I consume it? So at that point, the deprivation or the austerity of tapas will help to cleanse your indriyas. So the indriyas will slowly become de-addicted. Now, not to say that process is not painful, extremely painful. That's why in that stage of tapas, you will have austerity. In that stage, you will have immense tormentation. The temptation has become tormentation. The rajas is slowly getting cleansed out. This is the strong divine rajas that you're developing. So slowly it will help to turn you around. So see, sattva se you went into rajas. From sattva you went into rajas, and from rajas you are going to tamas, addiction. But now you are trying to unwind the tamas back into rajas to get into sattva and then gunatit. So again you are using the power of rajas. Power of rajas can be used both in the path of temptation to destroy yourself, as well as tormentation through austerity or tapas to grow yourself. So there you are, what I call the stage 4 sadhak, who will slowly cleanse his indriyas by changing his gunas And then he'll change his samskaras, the vrittis, the conscious thoughts that come in your mind. Because vrittis determine the samskaras. The forebrain determines the primitive brain. Your vritti waves, the thought processes you create, are going to be slowly sinking into your subconscious and become tomorrow's samskaras. Today's vrittis are tomorrow's samskaras. Today's thoughts are tomorrow's character. So that tendency is switching the samskaras will happen. But first you have to change the gunas, because gunas create predetermined action for you. And in the process, when you change your thought process, your speech changes, your action changes, your karma bandhan complex changes. So see how you started with the gunas, the material modes of nature, then you change your samskaras, the subconscious subliminal tendencies, and eventually your karma bandhan change. And you become karmatit. You break the cycle of karma. Karma is not applicable to you. That is the beauty of Ramana Maharishi and Neem Karoli. So that is the level you can reach. You are underestimating your capabilities just by keeping yourself preoccupied in these tendencies, because everybody else is doing that. Everybody else is smoking. It is the new cool thing to do. So you start doing it. That temptation tendency is destroyed by changing the environment, followed by slow, automatic, autonomous, spontaneous changing of the samskaras and the karma. Now, if you still persist in this path, the cravings that you experience first will change into boredom. So your cravings will also slowly go down. The first craving is the worst, and then the second wave will come, but will less worse. Third will come. Every now and then you'll get a big spike, trying to challenge your integrity, because the Prakriti Maya complex is still trying to get hold onto you. It doesn't want you to let you go back to the Brahmanand, your indivisible strength, peace, Brahmanand, the Brahman that you are. It wants to trap you in the Maya world, because you came here for a hitchhike ride, and now it's going to keep swinging you even against your will. The first time you came with your will, the second and third janma, or the birth reincarnation, are happening because of your karma bandha. So it doesn't want you to let go of the karma bandhan. It wants you to create more karma so it can trap you for longer. Lower for longer, that its goal. Keep you in the lower yonis for longer periods of time. And you want the opposite. You want higher for higher. You always want to remain in the higher yonis and eventually no yoni, and you always want to be in the state of bliss. Constant, persistent bliss, permanent, where you feel extremely satisfied, nothing else to do. So the sadhak will endure all the austerities to cleanse his indriyas, so the vishyas don't stick to it. The vishyas don't attach him. They don't anymore torment him. That is the beauty of sadhak. That is the beauty of austerities of tapas. That is all the intermittent fasting. That is all the self-work you do in vipassana or dhyana, in dharana, in chanting, in nishkam karma, your yajnadan tap. All these are various tools of the sadhak will endure, so that he can break the cycle of guna, or the material modes of nature, creating influencing association, thereby changing his samskaras and the karma bandhan. And he will still face, to be remembering, he will still face cravings in the process, but slowly the cravings will die down. And then he will get this constant peaceful state where he will have some boredom. The constant restful state is first perceived as boredom. Oh, we are not enjoying as much as we used to. Though gone are the days when we used to take a puff of smoke and we felt the high, or take a sip of wine and we felt so great. So he will have some he will miss it for a while, but eventually he will hate it. And eventually he will not even hate it. He will have zero, like whatever, it was okay, it wasn't that great anyways. So he will have that sense of diminished emotional exaggerated response, reactivity to that impulse in the first place. So the cravings have gone down, now in a restful state. The restful state you first intercept as boredom, but over time now you're becoming more constructive, because your rajas has become extremely cleansed, pure. It is almost firing up your manipura, so that you can do a lot of creative projects of nishkam karma, where the process is more important than the outcome. You're totally focused on the process. Your mental faculties are so acute that you can focus all your energies in that path and make immense strides. And that is how you gain success, because you're not focused on the profits, you're focused on the process of what you are doing. And the mind is such laser sharp acumen that you will attain it because the whole Brahman has come, the whole universe has come in sync with you, and you are kind of working with your intuition to get where you want to get. So that peace gives you enough time to work on those projects, and then you create this sense of pleasure. Now, this is not that pleasure, so I should not even use that word. It's a sense of GABA, or I should say relaxation. It's a sense of peace that you have created. You're not getting that intermittent spike of goodness and then it disappears, which creates more hankering and resentment and stuff like that in the later stage. This is uninterrupted peace, which brings a lot of fulfillment, gratification, and feel good about yourself. That is your state of mind in this state of constant being sadhak. So that is the fifth stage, the stage of a yogi, where he has made enough progress to the point where, for the most part, he will not deviate back to that path. He will continue to remain in this state or make a further advent, hit the escape velocity of prabodhan or enlightenment. But for the most part, he knows the trap of Maya. That is the conversion of sadhak to a yogi. At this point, he will remain unperturbed and he will continue the path of yajna, dan and tap. He will continue the path of three yoga, which is bhakti yoga, dhyan yoga, karma yoga, to obtain the gyan yoga or the prabodhan of enlightenment. He will continue the pranch pratyahara that I talked about with exercises, intermittent fasting, alkaline water, dhyana, chanting. He will continue these beautiful tendencies because he's slowly, incrementally compounding his sanskaras to the good pathway, in the yogic pathway, in the Daivik enlightened pathway, to attain the higher yonis and higher births and eventually break the cycle of births. So the sadhak has become a yogi and he will continue to make the strides, and eventually he will become a Brahmagyani who understands the universe. The divine enlightenment hits him. Nothing needs to be done anymore. He becomes the Ramana. He becomes the Neem Karoli. He is no more Hanuman. He becomes Ram. Because Hanuman in the unrefined state, which is helping others, is his process to become Ram. What you love the most, you become. Need Kid Brahmari. What you love, you will become that. Slowly there will be transition, transformation, and eventually you will become. The caterpillar will become the butterfly. So that transformation is slow, but it is doomed to happen. It is pre-programmed in the blueprint of that genes. So that's where the sadhak becomes Brahmagyani. So to sum it, my friends, all of us, whether knowingly or unknowingly, are going to be subjected to this six-fold path of dopamine, in which in the first stage there is a first exposure, the exposure of the Vishaya with the Indriya, because there is an imbalance in the Vivek or the consciousness with the ego or the Ahamkara. Ahamkara wants you to have experiences, observations are replaced by being the doer, that tendency to be a doer, whereas Vivek tells you that you're a witnesser, observer, you can observe, there's nothing, no experiences to be gained. So that imbalance happens, and then you are shuttered towards the ego pathway, and then the sattva, the balance is disturbed into rajasic ego, and the ego creates the first experience. You feel so good about it. That's the second stage of novice pleasures, the spike of dopamine that feels, oh my God, this feels so good. I hate the baseline. I get the spike. I feel so good. The spike disappears. I chase it again with the third cycle, the gunatit, I should say gunadhin, just slave to the gunas, slave to the vishayas. So you are repeatedly being exposed. In that way, you are getting attached to the vishaya or the object. And then you have lesser and lesser spikes of dopamine. But you still take it because it's better than the baseline. At this point, you become a programmed robot. You cannot help it. So then your novice pleasure becomes an obligation. Enjoyment becomes an obligation. It's not a free choice anymore. And that is the pathway of addiction, where nothing else matters. Your Vivek has totally been destroyed. There is no awareness. You are a tamasic prani who just wants to have the sensual enjoyment, whatever little you can get, or you'll crooked turn around the ways to get it in some other way because you're tired of not getting it. You're frustrated. So at that point, you are a miserable, pitiful soul who has to be corrected through the laws of karma. So that is the addicted person. That is the dead end of free choice. Tamasic tendencies have overridden everything else, and you have become gunadhin. You have become a slave to the gunas. You have become a slave to the material modes of nature. That is a dead end, and that's how the karma bandham will operate and turn the reincarnation to lower and lower tendencies in future life and be full of papas and sins and all the abominable and tendencies they will engage, as well as suffer and constant sinking deeper and deeper. until there is corrective tendencies of the karma bandhan to cleanse you through the deep austerities of pain, torture, misery, so that you can break away from the cycle. However, some people will not convert from the stage 3 gunadheen repeated exposures to addiction. They will choose the path of free choice. They will choose the path of being a sadhak. They will have the awareness to undergo the rehabilitation, and that is where the gunadheen rajasic prani becomes a sadhak, becomes an individual who will entertain the austerities, the tapas, cleansing activities of yajna, dan and tap, sacrifice, charity, austerity, self-cleansing, triyog, panch pratyahara, because he says, no, I don't want that pathway where my free choice is destroyed. I want to remain free. I want to remain liberated. I want to have a choice. I want to feel good all the time, not just a spike followed by a trough of depression. Then that individual from sadhak will become a yogi, where he is constantly perceiving the beauty of the universe. He is constantly engaging in activities which are bringing him feel good, gratitude, humility, the GABA, GABA aminobutyric acid, relaxation, peaceful. He has become, instead of a spike, he is chasing the baseline. But the baseline not very low, depressed of misery. It's a baseline which is elated, euphoria, and constantly happy. He's constantly happy. You cannot make him miserable, no matter what you say to him, because it doesn't matter anymore. His indriyas are constantly cleansed, so nothing, no vishya can stick to it and cause him more pain. They'll slip off. So anything you say, it doesn't matter to him anymore. He doesn't have that ego anymore. Ego has been destroyed, and his vivek has been re-established. The vivek ego imbalance that was there has been, the Hamkar Vivek Udvigna, as I called, has been destroyed, and the Vivek has been restored. Vivekanand, you are so happy in your Anandit, you are so happy in your own consciousness that you don't need anybody else to make you happy. That is the beauty of being a yogi. And the yogi, if it persists in that path, there will be slow compounding of his gunas, his karmas, his samskaras over time. He will hit the escape velocity. Just like something hits 11.2 kilometers a second speed, it will not return to earth. This individual will not return to earth for a reincarnation. He has gone from the ascendant pathway to the descendant pathway. He has worked himself so much, the ascendant pathway, which all of us are, slowly improving our births by births, making better births, making better karmas, samskaras, so that we can break the cycle of birth and rebirth. You have gone from being in the ascendant pathway, you became realized. So now you are coming by free choice. You are in the descendant pathway. Think of Neem Karoli Baba, Ramana Maharishi. Think of avatars, Krishna, Rama. Think of Buddha. These are individuals who come to teach us a lesson. They want to create an example of themselves, so we learn from them. Yadada acharati shreshtas devetaro jana asat pramanam kurute lokastanuvarte. As the great ascetics will do, so will the common people follow. Because herd mentality is there in the common people, that safety numbers. They feel safety numbers and tread that path. Whereas this individual is happy being alone, and he'll create an example of himself so that everybody else can learn. He's a descendant pathway. He has chosen to be reborn. You and I don't choose. We are sent here because we have already created enough karmas and samskaras that have to be exhausted before we will be liberated. So that's why the sadhak has become Brahmagyani, and now he can take avatara, come back and help us, or he can remain suspended in the ethereum and not choose to take birth, depending upon the way he feels. But he's a Nitya Mukta, as Ramakrishna says. He was born free. He never had karma bandhan. He was always free, whereas we are Nitya Baddhas. We are always born, and the mathematical logbook always is applicable to us in terms of what we do and how much karmas we exhaust or build. So that's how you become a Brahmagyani. But all of us will start in the state of Udvigna, or the imbalance, because Sattva, the balanced state, has to be perturbed for the cycle of creation to unfold, and all the participants, the souls, to come here and kind of experience the experiences, which is what they came here for. Once they are influenced by the experiences, they build samskaras. Once they act on those samskaras, they build the karma bandhan. The karma bandhan determines what kind of bodies we make, what kind of thought process we bring, and then there are always these influences. None of them are random. All of them are by mathematical calculations based on what we think, what we speak, and what we do, that helps us determine what kind of lives we will take. So try to understand this dopamine path and try to unlearn, because unlearning is the hardest thing, not learning in life. You have to unlearn the tendencies you have learned, whether it is of eating, whether it is of toxic relationships that you build, or whether it is of vices that you have in terms of smoking, drinking, gambling, trading. You have to unlearn them. Unlearning is hard. Unlearning is the pathway of converting the Rajasic prani into a sadhak, into a yogi, into a brahmagyani by shunning the dopamine pathway through the tendencies of changing your environment, changing your samskaras, thereby changing your karma bandhan. Hope you like this video. Please feel free to leave your comments below. Jai Shri Ram.